Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what's up, dude?
Not much. Today we are going to be chatting about the RCMP warning of civil unrest in Canada, municipalities warning of food scarcity due to climate policies, Toronto considering taxing rain, Scotland in Canada's united attack on free speech, a report finding Canada ranks last in primary healthcare among 10 wealthy countries, the FDA removing content advising against Ivermectin's use for COVID-19, and Trudeau's self-serving election reform. However, if before we get into things, you wouldn't mind giving us a kind review on Spotify or subscribing to our YouTube channel wherever you're watching, that would be greatly appreciated. All right, let's get into it. So first off, we've got a secret RCMP report warning of civil unrest among Canadians due to the grim economic landscape ahead. The RCMP has issued a warning to the federal government regarding potential civil unrest in Canada as citizens become aware of this grim economic prospect ahead. The warning is contained in a report labeled Special Operation Information, accessible only to RCMP officers and political decision makers within the federal government, and now apparently us as well. It paints a bleak picture of Canada's short-term future, citing factors like economic recession, climate change-induced extreme weather events, and geopolitical tensions contributing to global crises. Specifically, the report mentions the declining living standards for younger generations, emphasizing that many Canadians under 35 may never afford home ownership. Do you think this warning is something to legitimately worry about?
Well, yeah, of course it is. I mean, everybody's struggling to survive right now. What I found actually amusing about this is why they wanted it to be a secret, why it was a secret report. I mean, this is obvious. What do you think happens when no one's got enough money to put food on the table and survive? They revolt because they need to survive. When you back someone into a corner, they will do wild and crazy shit. To be quite honest with you, that's exactly what the government is doing. However, their solution is, well, we'll just take care of you and give you more money. But that doesn't work. You see, that has to come to an end because someone has to pay that piper. Someone's got to figure that out. And they don't have a real strong solution in place. And what you're seeing now is that you're seeing the result of that. Because now the economy's spiraling out of control because of all the money they've printed and all the issues that they've caused and all the super crazy government spending. This is now the situation we're in, right? So I think I did sort of a cost of living analysis on this last week or earlier in the week. And when you kind of look at the average cost of living and including rent, if you look at that right now for a family of four, and this is in Canada, not even in a city like Toronto, you know it's way higher in Toronto. In Canada, average family of four, $72,778 per year. The average income in Canada for a family of four is $75,452. So it's not like people in the city make way more money. So you know a little bit, but not much, especially at that scale, in the average range. So you know those people in this city, they're struggling. For sure, they can't cover their bills. And in other prairie provinces, maybe Eastern Canada, places like that, they might be okay. The thing is, when you look at cost of living, that does not include entertainment, leisure, travel, education, current debt, or health and wellness. So basically, nobody's getting by. Nobody's getting by, right? And then you look at what's happening right now. They're going to do a 23% increase on the carbon tax. You know, how do politicians, how does the RCMP, how does anybody think humans are going to react when they figure this out? And the thing is, this is not something that's on the horizon. It's right fucking now. And it's in a really bad situation. So look, this is very legitimate. And the government should be concerned because they've caused a huge, huge mess here. And while they take no accountability, they're getting to the point where they're the only ones to point the finger at this point.
Yeah, the thing that worries me here in regards is especially the highlight on the younger generation, because typically when civil unrest does occur, it is in the disaffected young males. And that goes to show if, more young men are showing loneliness, their economic future doesn't look too certain, can't afford a home. And then also on top of that, you've got the OECD pegging Canada as the worst performing advanced economy over the next 4 decades. And then also just, more and more young men are single, can't find relationships, and so on. And then you look at that and go, okay, what is going to happen when you've got a population of young, depressed, economically deprived males, essentially? And that is when chaos kind of usually starts coming around.
That's where you're going to see probably the physical violence. I don't know how crazy things get in Canada. I don't know what that looks like. But the reality is they're going to have support of the average person because this is the economic crisis that they're all facing right now. So, yeah, I mean, it is interesting to see, how that might play out this time around. The reason why I say that, maybe interesting is the wrong word. When you have fighting age males that are capable, things can get out of hand very quickly. But I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they looked at all the military age men in America and only 20% of them were actually mentally and physically fit to actually join the army. I think it was low 20%. That is insane, right? So I imagine Canada is probably a little better, maybe 1.5 times that, so maybe 35%. But that still means 2/3. So the large majority of these fighting age males aren't even capable enough mentally or physically to even join the army. So I'm using that as a proxy to sort of understand what they're capable of. And what I'm sort of identifying is, I wonder if the government's done such a great job, and not overall. This economic crisis is still going to have a lot of pushback, but I mean with that particular group of fighting age males, have they done enough job to suppress masculinity? Have they suppressed them enough mentally and physically that they're not quite as capable? So the revolt will be a drop in a bucket of what it should have been. It's a bit of a tangent, but I wonder how that plays out.
Yeah, I think it could end up having a blowback, a unintended consequence to that whole, trying to make men more feminine or less masculine, where it's that old Freudian concept of unexpressed emotions never die. They simply get buried alive and come forth later in uglier ways.
Damn straight.
And
well put.
So it is one of those things where it's they've kind of repressed, say, maybe these more aggressive tendencies, but that's just all bottled up inside of them right now.
So it's still coming out.
Yeah. Well, and you actually look at...
Yeah, that's a good point.
You actually look at the UN... actually, Klaus Schwab, in his Great Reset book, talks about how the UN... Although when I went to go look on the UN's website and stuff, I couldn't find a report talking about this because I wanted more information. But he said that the UN is predicting there will be at least 12 civil wars before 2040 in developed countries. And you're like, that was kind of the number they were throwing out, was 12. And you go okay, well, I mean, we are kind of seeing things head that way with major political polarization and such. So, I mean, who knows there?
Well, if you think about it, what is a reason for a country to actually revolt? There's only so many things. It's really one of two things primarily. It could be a third if you have a really big split between two particular religions. That I would say would be the third. But primarily it's corrupt government, so they overthrow the government. Usually that's in some sort of autocracy. The other one is you can't afford to live. That is primarily. You know what? Often the autocracy and the cost of living go hand in hand, and I do like to think that Trudeau is a bit of a totalitarian dick. So I mean, it kind of lines up with what he's doing. But those are the two things that primarily start these big revolts. And if you actually, take the kindness of Canada out of the equation for a second, that's exactly what's happening. We have a government that is objectively doing more tyrannical stuff with censorship, with economic policy. They really are. And he gets away with everything by creating this coalition. And it's becoming very evident to people. So I understand that it is not, I know that this is not an authoritarian government, but there are a lot of similarities. And that's true. I understand, people are like, oh, well, it's not China, it's not Russia. I know that it's not. But there is a reasonable amount of crossover at this point. There really is, if you're being objective. And then the next big thing is the economics. And this is spiraling out of control very quickly. Very, very quickly. So, I mean, one of two things happens. You are either going to see a big revolt from Canadians, or the government's going to start footing this bill through something like UBI. I still think that UBI, all I actually think you're doing with UBI, I think you're blowing hot air into the balloon. I think what's going to happen is maybe you don't have a revolt today, but give it 5 years and it's going to be even worse.
Yeah. Definitely. And then this leads us into another story here, which is going to be seemingly pouring gasoline onto the fire that is already raging here, which is municipalities warning of ineffective climate policies and that they will stoke food insecurity in Canada. The Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities strongly criticized the federal government's 30% reduction target for fertilizer emissions. In their document to Ottawa, the association association highlighted the unrealistic nature of the government's agricultural climate plan. They emphasized Saskatchewan's global reputation as a consistent and dependable supplier of safe agricultural products and expressed concern that the United Nations goal of eradicating world hunger by 2030 could be jeopardized by the federal target to increase agricultural exports. The association argued that the proposed reduction in nitrogen fertilizer use would hinder the country's ability to meet its export goals and suggested that the government collaborate with industry and farmers to find practical solutions without imposing rigid reductions. So what kind of devastation would reducing fertilizer use by 30% cause?
What it looks like is they're saying it's going to cause food insecurity, right? Now, what I would point to is I would say we've seen this over in Europe, right? And they basically said, hey, look, if you reduce this by this much, people are going to starve to death. This is going to cost lives. Doesn't seem like they have much of a problem with doing that in the name of climate change. They seem to do this stuff all the time. But what happened in Europe? Massive protests. Tractors, there's still farmers protesting throughout Europe, Brussels, EU headquarters, like they are going ham right now. And this is one of the primary things. So it was taxation and it was limiting the volume of goods they could produce. Those are the two primary things, right? So you're seeing the same thing here. Now, I'm not enough of a technical expert to know exactly what the ramifications of this are in terms of volume of output. If they're sort of saying, if they're reducing your target for fertilizer emissions by 30%, then it stands to reason that that is going to curb your production by 30%. What does that look like?
Yeah.
I mean, my wife works for an NGO in food security and food safety, and there are hundreds of thousands of people using food banks, and we still don't have enough food here for people. Now, a lot of it does go to waste. I'm going to be honest with you. One thing I learned through Meg is that a lot of it is wasted.
Isn't it like 40%?
It's pretty high. I think it might actually be more, believe it or not. That being said, which one of these problems are you going to fix? So if you can't fix the food security problem first with the food you currently have, how can you cut supply without it creating that problem? So you're going to have, you know what I mean? Like you can maybe do them in parallel, you know what I mean? And that's actually a reasonable solution. You're going, okay, we're wasting enough food. Maybe we can just produce less and we can fix that gap. But unless you have something in place to fix that, unless you have something in place to make that system more efficient and reduce waste through whatever measures you have. Some of it is changing best before dates. Some of it is just allowing food to be used even if it doesn't look as pretty. I mean, that is legitimately part of it, which is pretty wild. If you don't fix those things and you reduce this, what does this look like for Canadians? And not only that, we export a lot of goods, right? So what does that do to the economy as well? So now you've got people that are going to be starving, and that's maybe a bit extreme, but doing with less, getting by with less food rather. And then you're going to have these farmers now that aren't exporting as much, especially if they're exporting to the States where the dollar is higher. So what does that do to the business? And when you kind of look at this and you go, okay, 30% reduction, like you said, maybe, they reduce the output. Maybe we fix some food security things. Maybe they're okay. But what's actually going to happen is economically, they're going to fall apart. Imagine you had a business. We're in a restaurant. Imagine you have to cut your sales by 30% because the government says. How does that work for your bottom line? You're totally fucked. Give me 6 months and this is going to be owned by the government. So that's actually what concerns me a lot about this as well, sort of as a secondary step, which is why I think you're seeing a lot of pushback in the UK and in throughout Europe and stuff, is because they realize, hey, this is first of all dangerous. Second of all, the next step is you take everything from us because we can't afford it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying this is the motive, but I mean, in a very twisted, fucked up way, you could argue that you do eradicate world hunger by 2030 if all hungry people just no longer exist.
That's one way of looking at it.
But the thing to look at here as well is, to your point about how government would come in and take over if your business is, if it's a business that they would be interested in first taking over, if your economic prospects get so low. If you think about what we saw recently in Netherlands, it was about a year ago that the government under Mark Rutte was, who's now no longer the Netherlands PM, but he was completely on board with this 2030 agenda and all that kind of stuff. And he was even proposing forcefully closing 3,000 farms and selling them off to the government, right? So no matter what the route they take there is, you can kind of look at it and go, these governments, again with Ireland trying to forcefully cull cows and such, putting restrictive policies on their farmers, it looks like all of these governments are just trying to take a different route to the same place, which is to bankrupt farmers.
Yeah, it's almost sort of like, for lack of a better term, to sort of nationalize the food supply chain.
Yeah.
Which is pretty fucking wild. That is dangerous.
Which is scary to think about if that is
absolutely,
if that is the true motivation here. And
when you look at it, actually, so something just happened in the U.S. as well, and they just passed a spending bill there, right, for $1.2 trillion. I don't know enough about this, so someone would have to dig in a little deeper, but there is a provision in that law that allows them to limit the actual cattle production in the United States.
Wow.
So I just saw the article yesterday. I didn't dig in deep enough, but that's the premise of it. So you're seeing it everywhere, even there. I mean, to your point, it seems pretty obvious, right? And this is step one. You can't do it all at once. You can't cut it off at once. You just step by step. How do we bleed them dry so they have no other choice? Looks like this is what they're doing.
This is why I hate when people say what we're seeing right now is late stage capitalism. It's like, no, this is early stages socialism.
100%.
It's not the same thing. You look at even just the fact that right now the government is telling you who you have to hire, when they can work, how much you have to pay them. Now they're trying to dictate things like how much production farmers can have. Like, you're looking at this and going, nothing about this resembles free market capitalism.
Government intervention pretty much negates capitalism.
Yeah, well, free market capitalism, because
Yeah.
you could technically still have, like, say, crony capitalism,
Yeah.
which maybe you could argue we're in, but this is not, anything resembling.
Yeah, what I should say is, when you're going down that road, when that's the path you're going down, when it's becoming more and more government controlled, that's pretty much the opposite.
Yeah.
So it's just, to me, it just seems a little confusing.
Moving on here, we've got Scotland and Canada seemingly united in their attack on free speech. Under the new Hate Crime and Public Order Act in Scotland, police have been instructed to focus on comedians and performers targeting dramatic or comedic performances deemed quote-unquote threatening and abusive under the act. This move has drawn comparisons to Canada's legal framework, which similarly offers protections under the Charter and human rights legislation, but has faced criticism for its harsh effect on speech. The opposition Conservatives in the Scottish Parliament have raised concerns about the interpretation of the legislation, highlighting a shift in the standard for criminal offense from intention to stir up hatred to quote-unquote likely to stir up hatred. Overall, the parallel between Scotland's legislation and the developments in Canada's legal landscape underscore the ongoing attack on both free speech and expression rights in the West. So how is it that multiple countries so far apart are simultaneously pushing some of the most egregious censorship bills in human history forward at the same time? It's almost as if they're implementing the same agenda.
Yeah, almost as if, right? Let's look outside of Scotland. Let's look at the UK. They've got legislation in place that is some of the harshest in the world. They've had it in place for a decade. And you do, like, regardless of people trying to give me shit about it, they do actually arrest people for thought crimes. That's where it's at. They actually just... Sorry, this one's kind of funny. It's a little off topic. They just arrested and threw a guy in jail for his first... internet flashing. I don't know what else you call it. Like, he was sending nudes around and he got thrown in jail for 5.5 years. It's kind of funny. I mean, a little bit fuck that guy, but a little bit like, wow, like that's pretty wild. That's where things are at over there. Same thing in all of the EU through the Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act. Same thing, same legislation's in place, right? The United States right now has got a case with the Supreme Court about free speech and social media. I'm telling you, if they side with the Democrats there, this goes down a bad path, because this is all First Amendment rights stuff. It gets very dark very quickly.
Did you actually see the recently anointed Supreme Court justice, the one that wouldn't answer what a woman is? I can't remember her name, Jackson Brown or something like that. Just last week, she was caught on I don't know whether it was like a hot wire. It was supposed to be a private meeting that then got leaked, but she was saying how she's like, the First Amendment is getting in the government's way of our ability to focus and clamp down on bad speech, essentially.
Right.
I'm kind of paraphrasing how she worded it there at the end.
Same idea. The idea is there. So you look at, you got the United States. You look at what's happening in Australia. Wild. They're as bad as Canada nearly, right? So same thing. Everywhere in the Western world is kind of playing the same game. Everybody's cracking down on free speech. And it's pretty crazy. I mean, look, when you look at how this goes throughout history, it's the town square. then it's written, anything, and newspapers, stuff like that. Then it's radio, and then if you look, and then it was mainstream media and cable. The government somehow or another gets their hands in and controls the flow of information through all of these things. Social media was a big stick in their spokes, and it took them a long time to figure out how dangerous it was. I think primarily because they didn't know what to do with it, and B, it kind of had to run its course. They kind of had to figure it all out, and I think they had to get all on the same page. And when governments are changing so quickly, sometimes it can be difficult for everybody to get on the same page at the same time. Well, they're there now, and they're cutting everyone off the knees in terms of social media. What scares me actually with this one though is now they're getting outside of traditional forms of communication. No, maybe not traditional is the wrong word. They're getting outside of the mass forms of communication, and now it's one-to-one. Now it's individual. Now you're getting in trouble for thought crimes, like with Bill C-63. If someone anonymously thinks that you might commit a hate crime in the future, they can put an ankle bracelet on you and throw you in jail. This is wild. This is very unprecedented. This isn't just the government taking the hold of, some form of communication that they want to control now. This is them basically forcing you to self-censor. This is them attacking the individual. This is pretty crazy, and it's happening throughout the West. And what concerns me, oddly enough, with the one in Scotland right now is comedy is sacred. Comedy, when you start attacking, so comedy has to have this, they have to have basically free-for-all. They need to be able to call everything out within society and not be shamed or be put in trouble for it whatsoever. You should not be able to cancel comedians. There's like sort of a meritocracy to comedy. If it's funny, people want to go to it and they want to laugh. If people are there, it works, and that's what society wants. That's why it's a good litmus test to kind of see where society is. When you are suppressing comedians, to me, when you're doing that, I think it's, I think it raises fundamental questions about the state of free speech in democratic societies. So for me, this is actually a pretty big red flag.
So, especially to the point about comedians, they act as, the phrase that Peterson has put on it many times is your canary in a coal mine, because tyrants are the ones who are incapable of laughing at themselves, that can't take any criticism, right? You can, whether it be on a massive dictatorial scale behind government, or whether it just be in your personal life, whether there's like I've stopped looking at, say, you don't have to have political power to be a tyrant. But these people that can't have any humor about a situation, that can't have any opposing ideas, or even just think like, oh, this topic, I'm able to approach it in a lighthearted way. Mm-hmm. Those are your tyrants. Those are the ones that wish to impose terrible policies and shove them down your throat, and in order to control you. And to your point about the kind of Minority Report style future, being guilty in the future, and then you're also taking intent out of the scenario, and it's just whether it's likely to. Like, first of all, who judges whether something is likely to cause? That's
very open-ended.
And this is something I've dealt with in my personal life, and this isn't really a situation I've talked about before. I know I've talked about it to you in private, but like about 4 or 5 months ago, I had people in an employment situation turn on me like ferociously. And I worked somewhere for about 4 months or so, no issues ever with a single person in the building. I got along great with everybody. And then they found actually one person
stumbled onto your Instagram.
One person stumbled on my Instagram, made a group chat with 15 other employees at the business, and then proceeded to try to go through everything I've said for the last 3 years and find anything that they could be remotely offended about, and then try to stir up a more or less Maoist style struggle session against me, right? They even went after my girlfriend who was working there at the time, trying to be like, do you agree with the things he says and this and that? And it's just like, holy shit. But one thing is I tried to take the high road and tried to communicate to this person. I actually even mentioned to them, like, there's two states of human interaction, and it's only ever been communication and conflict, and I hope we can remain in a situation of communication here. And I just said, like, hey,
that's a really good thing to say. That's so disarming, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, that is a part of my arsenal now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
and then I just thought I'd read off, just because these are the people that are going to be saying launching these complaints to these government regulation bodies. Like, as soon as this law, like, I'm already certain that if this law was in place, I would already be under question by
100%. So would I.
Yeah.
I was right away. I was like, cool, I'm just going to call my lawyer ahead of time. And you know, it's just, I want to add one thing. Not only are they the people that are going to be complaining, they are the people that are going to be adjudicating.
Yeah.
That's what makes this even worse.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No. That's a very good distinction to make. So whenever I sent that message out, she responded, "I'll be honest, I don't have much to say to you. It's not a misunderstanding because of social media's limitations. It's more that I believe your views perpetuate a level of misogyny, transphobia, homophobia, and just generally promote a terrible narrative that paints myself as a queer woman and a lot of other people in my life as not only wrong, but you refer to people in my community in disgusting and incredibly offensive ways. There are people who quite literally no longer feel safe sharing space with you because they have seen that your political perspectives not only invalidate their humanity and lived experiences, but dismiss them as immoral and abhorrent." And you just go like, that's so. This is and she went on in another text message to me saying that it's people like me who rile up other people to hate them, and therefore I share in the responsibility of past hate offenses that have been done against her. So like, not only am I responsible for things that might happen to her in the future because of things that I have not said about her, but I am also now responsible for past instances that she's characterizing as hateful.
And let's be clear, you actually weren't offensive to her directly. You weren't offensive to the group. You stick to logic. People are just offended because it doesn't support their narrative. That's correct, right? So I think that's an important distinction to make. Yeah, this world is out of control. And if these things come into play, we're all in some serious shit. Anybody who thinks the way we think, I don't know what we do. I'm not going to stop. So I will fight these things legally. I'll just be like, all right, cool, man. I'll just do a GoFundMe and you guys can just watch me fight this.
Yeah, I don't mean to sound aggressive, but it's one of those things where I made the decision about a year or two ago that I will happily face the consequences of speaking my opinions. I have no interest in living in a world without freedom of speech, expression, thought, any of these things. And so I will happily be punished for essentially living up to those principles and saying, like, look, you'll be very hard pressed to even find a time in my past that I've ever actually said, you can go through a bunch of content that I've ever actually said these groups or this are this certain way. It's always, this is an idea, or this is an idea being pushed forward by this group, and this is why this idea is absolutely terrible.
Yeah, I mean,
but somehow criticizing ideas is criticizing. Well, that's what happens when people have their personality and their identity wrapped up in their political beliefs, right? Is that as soon as you attack their political beliefs, you attack them.
So one of the things that has gotten it to this point is that, first of all, I'm the same as you. I don't actually, like, I call people like a dick or an idiot or something once in a while. I usually curb it, though. I'm usually pretty tame with all that stuff. Anything else I say is generally data driven, especially with some of those other videos. And like the easy thing for me is I actually don't have any hate in me. I actually don't hate people. I don't care what you are, what color you are, where you're from, or what your sexual preference is. I really don't care. I really want everybody to do whatever they want to do. I just don't want the government being tyrannical and pushing that crap on me. That's kind of how I feel about this stuff. So I don't really have to worry about anything I've done or said. Like I'm safe in that if you're actually being logical about it, I'm in a good space. However, what has happened is this conversation has gone from your opinion to my opinion. Now that's gone. You can't have an opinion. But now it's gone one step further, where now silence is violence. So, you know, for these people, anything that doesn't support their narrative is now hate speech. That's why this is so crazy to me. It's not that, like, you have two things right now that are making this worse. First of all, the law is insane. Bill C-63 is some of the craziest legislation Canada has ever seen. It is fucking mental. But when you add that in addition to where the culture is currently at, where the cultural conversation is at, and how you can't even say anything to these people because, and if you don't just support them, that's also a problem. When you put those together, I mean, it amplifies this 10x, and it makes this society very dangerous to be a part of.
Yeah, they're trying to leave you with one option, which is support what they say. Yeah. You are hateful if you don't speak up. You are hateful if you speak an opposing opinion, and so that leaves you with the only approval you can get from them is if you support their insane ideas.
Which is exactly what a lot of these are. That's the thing. Again, it's not about people being who they want to be. You can do whatever you want to do. I don't care. There's very few things that come into play when these but as soon as you cross the line of logical and you go to insanity, yeah, we got it. As society, we have to draw the line here. That's the thing is I think a lot of times they just lump everything in together. Well, if you don't agree with everything I say, then, you don't agree with anything and you're a problem. It's like, no, guys, look, 10% of what you guys are doing is absolutely mental and you need to stop. It needs to stop. And this being driven by government policy, it needs to end. That's really what we're fighting. But the thing is, they lump it all into one thing and then all of a sudden you're every kind of problem they can name all at once.
Yeah, and this just happens to be the social issue that's at the front of it, right? Whether it be the LGBTQ stuff or whatever fucking labels she's throwing at me, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia, whatever.
Yeah.
That's just what is cloaking this underlying, like, dogmatic human behavior. But I don't care what the issue would be. If you were coming down and trying to say that I have to say that Christ is king, that if that's what they used to do during the Inquisitions, right? So if this is the exact same behavior, and that's what I'm standing against. Because yeah, if you tried to make me that or say that Allah is the one and only God, that Muhammad is the final prophet, I don't care. Any of that, no matter what it is, if you try to make me say your political beliefs,
yes,
that's what I'm standing against.
Yeah, I get into the nitty gritty sometimes, and that's not really necessary. Fundamentally, it's that you can't tell me what to think or say.
Yeah.
That's the end of it.
Yeah.
Agreed.
All right. Moving on here, we've got Canada ranking last in primary healthcare among 10 wealthy countries. A recent survey conducted by the Canadian Institute for Health Information revealed that Canada ranked last among 10 high-income countries in terms of access to primary healthcare. Only 86% of Canadians aged 18 and older reported having a regular doctor or medical care facility in 2023, down from 93% in 2016. This decrease means that approximately 4 million Canadian adults lacked access to primary care last year.
Trudeau's really running out of soapboxes, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is pretty much, and they say since 2016, so a year after he got into power. I think the ranking highlights a rather large gap between the goal of first world healthcare, and our reality, right? I think it's important to identify that we don't spend the most amount per capita of taxpayer dollars, but like we're second or third. We're right there at the top. So not only is the system an absolute mess, we're spending more money than almost every country on our healthcare. That's how broken this system is. What are we doing here? And I mean, I do want to highlight one thing. I love to rip on Justin Trudeau. I do love it because I really don't like anything the guy does. However, this is not just his fault. This is a provincial problem, and it's also a municipal problem. And I've gone over this before. The spending on healthcare in Ontario is around 80 to 90 billion, and the actual amount that goes to your healthcare is like 16 billion. So it's very, very inefficient spending, even at the provincial level, right? I think the problem is, from a top-down approach, is you're fostering misuse and inefficient use of money, right? And use Javier Milei as example, right? Who reposted our Twitter video. But when you use that as an example, you kind of go, that's where top-down leadership. So the way that he's behaving at the top, it does bleed down into these other markets, right? And so that's why I think ultimately the federal government is always responsible in a sense for how the country's operating. But to be fair, this is a problem across the board. So all of our governments are letting us down.
At least with America, if you're getting bad healthcare service, you can theoretically get around it. You can withdraw yourself from it. Whereas in Canada, we have to first get taxed up front, and we don't really have a say in whether we withdraw from that service or not and just get to keep our money and direct it elsewhere. And yeah, Canada's healthcare system, sure, it's great that we can have emergencies and go in and not get financially punished for that. But at the same time, anything resembling, quote unquote, like health care of your day-to-day health, it's like I do everything in my possible power to stay away from any hospitals or doctors for that reason.
Yeah, and I think ultimately everybody should,
Yeah.
right? It's one of those ultimate responsibility things. You should take care of your health. It's the only one you get. It's like getting your oil changed, man. You got to take care of your body. You get one vehicle. Just do the best you can with it, for sure. I'm on the same page with you there. I mean, I just think Canada's system, it needs to change. If you look at how the Netherlands actually runs their system, they do a split between public and private.
Right.
And how that works, what the difference is, it's not a free for all. The difference is the private sector takes the overflow from the public sector. So the private sector can manage some private clients, but primarily what they do is they manage the overflow from public. So that means that people are always getting care. No matter what happens, you're getting care. Even if you have a surge in some particular, maybe there's a pandemic. If there's a surge in something, there is still enough a private business to be able to manage that overflow. That's why their system works better. There are some nuances to it that I don't deeply understand, so that's a bit of an aerial view, but that system works. And if you look at it in these other Scandinavian countries, they do similar things and they work, and that's why they rank so high. I just don't understand why we refuse to look at that model and maybe attach ourselves to it or adjust or just make these changes. But I guess it kind of comes back to this thing that our government is so big and bloated and fat that it can't really make substantial changes right now. That's why I think it needs to cave in on itself, or has to have, like, it needs a revolution within itself, because it's such a mess that you look at this and you go, you guys are burning probably close to $400 billion now. It's like, I think it was 366 or something. But I bet if you look at this year's fiscal, I bet it's going to be close to 400 billion with all the new immigrants that came in. So you're burning that much money on a system and you're dead last. You know what I mean? That much money and you're that inefficient. I just don't know the first step they take to actually fix it. So like you said, I guess the best advice is take better care of yourself.
The weird thing with Canada is we almost have this like religious-like faith in our healthcare system, so that when you see, say, Ontario start playing with the idea of allowing privatization in the medical sector, man, like you see a lot of pushback on that, because people all of a sudden think that any allowance of privatization is all of a sudden going to turn us into America.
Well, I think what's happened is the government has portrayed our healthcare as something that it's not. And maybe it was at one time, and maybe that's an old belief system that still exists. So anytime people, like if you ask our parents, hey guys, where do you think Canada ranks in the top 10 of wealthy countries in healthcare? And I'll tell you, they spend almost $400 billion a year. Where do you think they rank? I fucking guarantee not one person over 60 is going to say dead last. No one thinks that. They have this perception that it's something that it's not, and they don't want to lose that, especially because they're a little older and they more often need healthcare. But the reality is, it's just, they've done a good job of branding our system, and that's why people are so reluctant to see change.
I also noticed something, because I live right by Queen's Park here in Toronto, which often gets used as protest grounds. The people that were there whenever all of that protesting was happening against the likelihood of privatization, none of them looked healthy. So it was very telling to me that essentially a mob of blobs was
a mob of blobs.
A mob of blobs was protesting the idea that there wouldn't be some overlord there responsible from here on out for their health. And it looked very like, to me, like, oh, well, it doesn't look like these people are responsible for their health in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely going to be the people that don't want to see things change. But again, I think it's just a lack of understanding. They don't understand the mechanics of what's trying to be applied here. Because if you think about it, if all those people had to depend on public healthcare no matter what, okay? And then you privatize a certain aspect of it. If no one can get care today, and that's 100% of the patients, and then 20% can afford private care, they go off on their own. Well, what happens? Now the public system gets alleviated by 20% of the flow. So now those people that needed public health care have better access to it. Mm-hmm. No one's thinking this through properly. And that's why you get idiots out there with pickets screaming and yelling that can't take care of themselves. They don't understand. See, this is the problem I have. People are so uninformed. And then they go out and they make it their hill to die on because they need something to associate with. And it frustrates me because like the ignorance is not an excuse anymore. You know what I mean? I don't know that it ever was, but it's definitely not now. And you see these people arguing and protesting against these things. You see it across a spectrum of issues. But that's one of the big reasons why I do the things that we do and why I say the things that we say and why I'm in this space right now is it frustrates me that people are just not informed. And in our side, it's not about a lack of interest. It's really hard to find the information. On the other side, I'm just frustrated with them, you know?
How many people do you know that are very well off financially? How many of them use our public healthcare system when something comes up? No, like none of them.
A lot of people I know, anybody that I know that has money always has another solution.
Everybody I know that has money is like, if something actually goes wrong with their health, first thing they do is go and consult doctors in other countries, because in public sectors, there's no incentive for innovation.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot better healthcare in other parts of the world, and we don't seem to be doing anything to improve or, like you said, innovate. And I think a lot of it is driven by the fact that everything is publicly funded and it's inefficiently publicly funded.
One thing is that with our government, when you have this new approach to dealing with some sort of illness, if it doesn't fit into their top-down prescription of this, the government tells them, the doctors, when this issue arises, this is our protocol. You don't actually have individual doctors coming up with their own protocols for these kind of things. And then what you end up getting is each one of those solutions that gets prescribed to those doctors is the cheapest and the quickest possible solution. And this is how we end up in a world where we're now reading headlines talking about how much money the government could save by putting forward medically assisted dying and such, right? And then so everything goes through that lens. And actually, side note, I was reading something there the other day about how a young veteran too, was offered medically assisted death without bringing it up and won an $18 million lawsuit against the government for that. And then I thought that was funny because the big brag was that medically assisted dying could save up to like roughly $100 million annually in healthcare spending, and go, well, there's your 20% of savings gone from one malpractice.
I have another friend, actually, someone that works for me. Same thing. Her father had cancer. He basically beat it. He was on his way. He was getting discharged from the hospital, and she said they kept suggesting medically assisted dying. They wouldn't stop. He never came out of the hospital. So she's in the middle of it with them as well. It's pretty wild, man.
I don't see how you can take a Hippocratic oath saying do no harm and then also do
the things they're doing.
Yeah, it's insane. Okay, moving on here to the FDA settling its ivermectin case and agreeing to remove content advising against its use for COVID-19. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has reached a settlement to remove social media posts and web pages discouraging the use of ivermectin to treat COVID-19. This decision came after a lawsuit for doctors who argued that the FDA overstepped its authority by advising against ivermectin use. The FDA has already removed one web page stating not to use ivermectin for COVID-19, and within 21 days, it will remove another page with similar content. The settlement also includes deleting social media posts critical of ivermectin. Doctors involved in the lawsuit believe this settlement is a victory for medical professionals and patients, as they felt the FDA's actions interfered with the doctor-patient relationship. The FDA, however, maintains it did not violate any laws and stands by its position that ivermectin has not been proven effective against COVID-19. So, step in the right direction.
Yeah, it is. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's more of a moral win for anybody, because we're kind of beyond the point that you have to really worry about COVID anymore. But I think it's a good thing to see that, you're going, hey, look, you didn't implement these things for our own good, because now you're backtracking on them. What you're basically saying is you couldn't have any sort of treatment in place, or else you couldn't have given the big pharma companies emergency use authorization, which a lot of people already knew. Now, I don't want to say necessarily that, ivermectin is a cure-all. It is one that, the people that created or invented or discovered it, they won a Nobel Prize in 2015. And this was Nobel's first award for treatments of infectious diseases in over 6 decades. Some people will argue that it's purely an antiparasitic, which is what it's well known for. However, it does appear that it does have strong antiviral properties. So I'm just going to go through this one study that I did some research on when I was doing another piece of content. So there was a study published by the NIH, so the National Institute of Health, and that's pretty much top tier in the States, right? So since March 2020, when ivermectin was first used against COVID-19, more than 20 randomized clinical trials tracked inpatient and outpatient treatments. 6 of 7 meta-analyses of these ivermectin treatments reported in 2021 found notable reductions in COVID-19 fatalities, with a mean 31% relative risk of mortality versus controls. In other words, risk reduction in mortality decreased by more than 2/3. During mass ivermectin treatments in Peru, excess deaths fell by a mean of 74% over 30 days in the 10 states with the most extensive treatments. Furthermore, reductions in deaths correlated with the extent of ivermectin distribution in all 25 Peruvian states. So what this says, look, so first of all, randomized clinical trials, top tier. Meta-analysis, top tier. Those are as good as they get, right? And this is what these studies are saying, that this was very effective as a prophylactic. So this is good. This is good. You take this beforehand. It may not help you when you have it, but this would have actually been a reasonable substitute for a vaccination. It really would have been, because a vaccination is also a prophylactic, right? So again, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but when you're looking at this data, it looks very promising for them to have smeared it. Because if you said anything about this, so one thing that happened was pharmacists were not filling prescriptions. Insurance companies were not covering the cost, and we all kind of know what happened in the media. As soon as you said anything, even if you considered suggesting ivermectin, you were made into a pariah, right? So, I mean, the FDA did a good job, but it's not hard to see the connections here. The FDA's basically funded by Big Pharma. Big Pharma needed this to be quiet or else they couldn't get the emergency use authorization, which is exactly what happened here. So again, I don't think it's a cure-all. If you look at the data, it looks very promising. So yes, I think it's a win, but also I think it's really frustrating that our regulatory agencies are constantly working against us. And this is such a great example of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I haven't dove too deep into this whole stuff on ivermectin and COVID, but I have been recently reading Robert F. Kennedy's book, The Real Anthony Fauci, and he definitely touches on it. And it seems like there's more than enough to question in regards to that. And there is a definite incentive in order to shut down any discussion about that, right? Because if there is a proven treatment for a disease, then you can't get emergency use for it, right? So, and we know that would then mean that the vaccines would have had to pass more rigorous standards, and which now we realize they can't.
They wouldn't have, no.
So I don't know exactly to what degree personally how effective ivermectin is against COVID, but I am very much certain there was a effort or a very large incentive to make sure that if it was, nobody would find out.
Yep. Again, like I said, like this is just the study I can reference because I'm not an expert in this either, but this is on the NIH and it does look very promising. So if you look at how it was painted in the media versus this study, 6 of 7 meta-analysis studies, and you look at that, you kind of go, there's a massive disparity here. So you know that they were smearing it on purpose. You know what I mean? You weren't being truthful with me. You know that for sure. You can't maybe tell to what extent, but it's very clear.
So heading on here, we've got Toronto considering taxing citizens for rain. The Toronto City Council is exploring a controversial proposal, a stormwater charge. This fee would target property owners based on the amount of impervious surface area on their land, such as roofs and driveways. The government argues that it's necessary to manage stormwater runoff effectively. The city contends that increased impervious surfaces disrupt the natural water cycle, and that rainwater would typically percolate into the ground, now runs off quickly, overwhelming storm drains and potentially leading to flooding. This can damage property and pollute waterways, and the charge aims to incentivize property owners to adopt green infrastructure solutions like rain gardens that promote water absorption. So do you think the government will be crazy enough to try to tax air next?
Guys, we gotta stop. We gotta stop this now. This is wild. Like, this is so insane. I love how they're like, well, it's for stormwater. No, it's based on the rain, because they're saying like they do aerial photography to see how much impervious surfaces you have on your property. Bro, what are we doing? What is happening? Look, this is what you get when you vote in an NDP mayor, for starters. That being said, it's actually happening in a couple other cities too, which is wild. The government was never put in place to tax you for the rain. People got to draw their line somewhere. This seems like a really good one to try to convince a lot of people that still support government spending to jump on board and be like, are you sure?
I just want to remind everybody that the American Revolution was over 2% on tea. so we're now getting taxed on fucking rain. What the hell?
This is wild, dude. So one of the big things I would say is they are actually holding public consultations on this. So They were planned for sometime in April, and it hasn't been released exactly when yet. But if you live in Toronto, please take the time to show up to City Hall and absolutely shred Olivia Chow for this policy. Otherwise, we've got no good excuse.
When is it? I'll go.
It's in April. I don't know exactly when.
We should
it
both
just says
go
in
and
April,
just both.
I don't have property or a business in Toronto anymore. I mean, whatever. It's not like they're gonna, But I mean, yeah, this is wild. They're gonna be charging us for rain. Come on, man.
It's funny, too, that one of their reasons is that the rain runoff ends up polluting waterways. It's like, so you're telling me you need to tax me because the rain is harmful to water?
Yeah.
Like, what?
You can't even swim in this part of Lake Ontario because the government policy that have allowed dumping in the water anyway. This is, I don't know what else to say other than this is full-blown batshit crazy. This is so insane. And I love how they're like, well, it's for the environment. It's so that you adopt green infrastructure. Okay. So you're telling me because I got a roof and a driveway, right? So then how would I lower my taxes? If I put grass on my roof, are you going to cut my... now I don't have to pay anything? And if I just don't have a driveway and I park on the fucking lawn, is that going to be okay for you? And how often are you going to do this aerial photography so we can update our charges? Because I'll tell you, rather than paying a tax, I would put grass on everything just to be a dick.
Mao and Stalin would be laughing in their graves at this moment at the creativity that our modern day communists are coming up with in order to tax us. Again, I know I could probably sound like somebody in a straitjacket just banging their head against a wall yelling Marxism, but but like, I cannot think of any reason that something like this is getting put in place other than an ideological motive to punish property owners.
I think a little less nefarious, actually. I think the government of Canada has become so large and so bloated, and more of our citizens work for the government. So it's this thing where the only solution they have is to take more money from you to keep it alive. So they don't go, how can we cut spending? They go, how can we make more money to keep affording the situation? That's kind of their strategy. It never really seems to be about cuts because that involves cutting labor. So they look at this and they go, we need to bring in more money, which is why Chow wants to did raise the property tax by 10%. And now she's like, well, how can I bring in more money? I'll tax them for the rain. They just keep thinking of new ways to take your money. But again, this goes back to our original conversation.
Marxists love to think of new ways to take your money.
Exactly. And now, if you go back to the original conversation we had when we started this podcast, was about the RCMP and how the economic crisis people are facing is going to create a revolt. If they continue taking your money and they continue taxing you, you're going to have less money to pay for the bills you already can't afford. This is getting out of hand quickly. And that's why I actually think this is just more about... this is more like local level politics. This isn't the federal level. So I actually just think she's a moron. This is what I actually think. I think she's just like, well, I need this much money in so I can keep the government to be the same size, not realizing that the knock-on effects of it, right? Which is going to create more just unsettled Torontonians. People are just going to be more pissed off. You know what I mean? It's I don't know. I think I hope our government's coming to the end of the rope here, because when they do stuff like this, it's like, how can you justify this to people anymore that can't put food on their table, that you're taxing them for the rain falling out of the sky?
This is the same government which is proposing geoengineering and to essentially cloud seed in order to make it rain.
Oh, damn.
You're like, so you're going to tax me on rain and then also have mechanisms in place that allows you to control when it rains. Like, go fuck yourself.
Oh, that's so great. I did not think of that. Thank you for that. Yeah. Wow. Fuck this place. Man, I'm swearing a lot today. Jesus.
All right. Well, I don't think we're going to get you off that train at all here with the next topic, but the last one for the day is Trudeau proposing delaying the 2025 federal election by 1 week to secure Liberal pensions. In the newly introduced election reform bill by the Trudeau Liberals, there is a curious change in the election date for 2025, moving it just 1 week later than usual. So according to the Canadians Elections Act, federal elections are scheduled for the third Monday of October, not exceeding 4 years after the previous election. That would make the next election set for Monday, October 18th, 2025 at the latest. However, the proposed reforms in Bill C-65 by the Liberals include a provision to hold the election on Monday, October 27th, 2025. And it is curious that this decision is being made when the Liberal MPs who were initially voted in during Trudeau's minority win in October 2019, need an extra 3 days to collect their federal pension. So should Canadian taxpayers be required to pay the pensions of people who deteriorated their economic conditions.
No, all these people should go to jail. Like that's the real answer. But there's nothing you can do about it. There's just zero. He's got the power to do it, and it's going to happen because it's also probably going to serve people in the NDP as well. So that's where his coalition exists. That's what's going to happen. That's going to be the end of it. At least he supports his own people once in a while, though. I mean, there's a silver lining, I suppose. And people speculate. They're like, well, that's not why it was done, bro. It's like, okay, maybe that wasn't why it was done. But that's actually what happens. And I read another article that it's going to be millions of dollars. It's not a few bucks. Millions of dollars are going to be taken at a taxpayer hands rather, to pay for this.
Pay for the pensions or to pay for the election switch?
Pay for the pensions. Yeah.
Well, and then even something to keep in mind too is the amount of money that has to go into formulating, writing, and tabling a bill, the amount of resources, time, parliamentary time, all of this kind of stuff, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, just to put these things in motion.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the election reform bill anyway, so I mean, adding this in is not a substantial additional cost, but I think the election reform bill is ridiculous as well.
Exactly.
So if you want to boil it down to that, for sure, I'm on the same page. All you can do is look at this and say, you cannot vote for this man again. You cannot vote for liberals right now. I'm not saying that they're wrong all the time. Right now, their party is totally corrupt, and this is a perfect example. It's exactly what this is. This guy is just making Canadians bend over for these politicians and breaking the rules because he knows they're very, very unlikely to win again. That's what this is. I mean, come on, man. What else do you need to see? It's like everything this guy does is just one more reason as to why he should not be reelected. So at least that, I guess. I mean, I hate that that's always my silver lining in all these issues, but here we are again.
Actually, just as of yesterday, the CPC is up 7% to 41% overall, and the Liberals are down 10% now. So, it's looking like the Conservatives are just going to have a huge majority come around next election. Granted, everything goes the same way that it's the trajectory is on right now.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I go back to is that I'm just concerned that he launches a universal basic income. I'm concerned he launches GLBI because there's an identical bill in the Senate and the House that is working its way through right now to give everybody a universal basic income. And if they do that, Trudeau's going to have a real chance at re-election because the country's unaffordable. It's untenable to people. And if you give them enough money to survive, and then there's the potential of that being taken away from them, they're going to vote for this tyrannical asshole again. You know what I mean? There I am swearing. You're right. You got me. So that is my one concern here. But the nice thing is he is making moves like this that suggest he's aware that he may not be winning. So we'll see how it goes.
And I agree. That's his last hope is something like a UBI. That's the only thing he can possibly put forward to potentially sway people back towards him, I believe. But with that being said, I am faithful that Pierre is the first competent Conservative leader in a long time that could actually dismantle, and even though citizens are getting their $2,000, I think he would be able to break down in a way that they would understand why it is actually against their best interests in the long term.
Yeah. It's just hard to get people there when they're 47% of the country is living paycheck to paycheck.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. And I just think, a guy like if Aaron O'Toole was standing on that stage and having to argue against $2,000, zero chance that the Conservatives would be able to look favorable in that debate. But I think somebody like Pierre, who is able, and you've even seen it now too, like name me one time that Trudeau has put Pierre on his back foot in a debate on the House of Commons. It's Pierre is running like roughshod over this guy 100%. Every time that they have to talk.
It does bring me a bit of joy.
Yeah, for sure.
The thing that I would suggest that Pierre might have to do is he may have to come out with some sort of system to curb it. Be like, okay, like everybody still gets the money this year, and then you have to meet a threshold to get it the next year. Then they have to meet a tighter threshold the year after. But don't worry, because in the meantime, I'm going to fix the economy in these ways so you won't need it. And if we don't do this, the country's going to burn to the ground. So I imagine he's got some plan in place like that because I'm an idiot and I've already thought of it. So I'm still hopeful that we'll be okay. But
I guess the last thing that I'll add here in regards to this is, because this is a very socialist idea to have a universal basic income of kinds, but the problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money.
Yeah, there you go.
Anything else you want to add today?
Nope, that's everything.
Before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our website to sign up for our newsletter, which goes out 6 days a week. That's blendrnews.com, BLENDR news.com, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.